All right, good afternoon. Welcome back. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Before I begin class, or at least lecture, which actually should be lecture 22, not 12, we've got a couple of announcements, so turning to you first.
I volunteer for an organisation called Getting Bonds. It's a voluntary health program here at Berkeley, and we raise funds to send free buses to some to go and visit parents and children and their parents, to go and visit their parents in prison, because a lot of the time people don't get to visit their parents on bus, don't get to visit their parents because it's too far or it's too much money. So we raise money to pay for the buses, pay for like all the forms that they need to fill in, food for the day, and just make it a really fun day for the kids to go and visit their parents in prison. So I'm currently holding a raffle of English goodies, so there's cakes, cookies, chocolate, loads of different stuff in this raffle to raise money for it, and it's a $1.50 ticket or $5 to $5. So come see me after class, or before class on Thursday, or after class on Thursday. I know a lot of you are interested in machine class as well, so you can see me there and buy a ticket and help the kids. Thank you.
There's a fiver. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. And there's a link to your organization we can put up on the website or whatever.
Yeah,
That'd be great. You're up next.
Hey guys, I got my name is Sadia, and thanks for listening to the announcement. I just wanted you guys to remind me to make sure you guys vote in the next couple of days. It's super important that all the communities have representatives that are really represented in the ASCC. And voting is super simple. It'll take you like 2-3 minutes tops. You can go to elections.ascc.org, and it's really easier. You can actually vote on here there, so you can vote on your laptops, you can vote on your phones. You can also vote at the polling stations, but obviously right now no one wants to do that before you but yeah, so please make sure you guys vote, and you know, give thought to who you guys are going to vote to. It'd be super appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other campaign speeches or anyone running? Before I turn to the topic of today, mass incarceration inequality, I want to just remind you that on Thursday we'll be joined by Assemblymember Nancy Skinner, who represents the 14th Assembly District, which I think is Berkeley, more or less, and has been in the Assembly now for a couple of years. So she's, I think, relatively at the beginning of her tenure there. It's, we're a term-limited Assembly and Senate. She is very interested in issues of criminal justice in general, and in particular the prison crisis. And she'll join us, and we'll talk. I've given you as reading something that I think will support our discussion of realignment, some of the other opportunities that are opening up right now. So that'll be on Thursday, and I hope we can have a full turnout for her. We'll have a chance to ask her questions about what the legislature's response to some of the issues we've been taking up. We've talked to her about the death penalty initiative, 3 strikes, solitary confinement, or any of the other issues that are on your mind. I must say it's been on my mind that seniors are getting very close to the very end of the term. You've been on my mind recently because of how dour the current economy is. And I just wonder, how many are seniors in the class right now? Raise your hand. So maybe about 40%. How many of you know like what you're going to be doing in the fall? So I see a couple of people, which is good. Well, can you share with us what are you up to?
I'm going to law school.
You're going to go to law school. Do you know where yet?
Yeah, I'm going to Tulane.
Tulane, excellent. New Orleans would be such an exciting city to be part of. Fantastic. What are you going to do?
I'm going to go back full-time to my current employer, which is the legal defense fund for the California Charter School.
Wow. And they held your job?
They did, yeah.
That's excellent. I was shocked the other day to learn about I have a new secretary or faculty support person, I think we call folks these days to do that. And, I got an email about this new person and their qualifications. And I almost fell out of my chair when I realized that the person has a JD from UCLA and has passed the bar. All right. So if you're taking a job as a secretary, even though Berkeley Law is a great place to work and there may be all kinds of reasons why this is a very appropriate job for this person to be wanting to take. But I suspect it says a little bit about how tough the job market out there is right now. So I just want you to know that you're not alone. I think I can speak on behalf of all the parents in the state of California when I say you're welcome home. We appreciate and we're proud of what you've accomplished, even if you don't have a job lined up right away. And I'm also trying to think about how some of the things that we've addressed in this course may be relevant. I do believe, although I don't have a very concrete set of jobs right now I can point to that are going to be kind of realignment jobs or post-mass incarceration jobs, for reasons I hope to convince you over the next couple of weeks, I think mass incarceration has been a kind of multi-generational disaster for our country and our state, but that turning away from it is a multi-generational opportunity to kind of put our country back on track. And there's a lot of work to be done, kind of putting people back into roles where they can be successful in society, formerly incarcerated people, helping communities that have been heavily marked as problematic by incarceration restore their actual capacity to do good things for their community members. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for that. What those jobs look like right now, I'm not super clear on. I'm convinced this class would be a good resume element for those jobs when you can find them. And some of them certainly going to be volunteer jobs at the beginning. So I'm going to be thinking about that over the next couple of weeks. And as I bump into other more concrete examples, perhaps that I can point to of things that look to me like examples of this kind of post-mass incarceration economic opportunity. But think of this a bit like New Orleans after Katrina, on a broader scale, America after the Great Depression. There's a real cleanup operation to be done here and a lot of opportunity. So let me turn. Today's class was going to pivot from the question of what mass incarceration is and what caused it, which Professor Perry discussed with you on Thursday of last week, to the question of what it does, what are the consequences. And those are really some of the different questions, right? We can, no matter what caused, even if we believe, for instance, that mass incarceration was caused by an unprecedented boom in criminality that kind of forced the hand of the state to imprison many more people than it ever had before, which I don't believe at all. Its consequences would nonetheless be worthy of consideration. Before I turn to those consequences, I want to make sure that we're sort of on the same page, because I missed your discussion with Professor Perry. Here's just a picture of incarceration rates in America. Actually, the circles here are prisons and jails together. The line without circles is just prisons, and that actually just goes back to 1925. The other one you can see goes back all the way to the end of the 19th century, so it's even farther. And you can see just the magnitude of the shift that begins roughly in about 1980 or so, and that is part of what we talk about. Well, it defines at least the time period in which we talk about mass incarceration. But let me just kind of as a review and make sure I understand what Professor Perry, where you got with Professor Perry, let me ask, how would you define mass incarceration? What are the key elements that distinguish mass incarceration from other forms of incarceration as punishment that we've seen various forms of in our own country since the penitentiary was invented at the beginning of the 19th century? What are sort of the signature elements, if you will, of mass incarceration? Anybody? Yeah. So there's one way to describe that is the objectives of punishment. In the era of mass incarceration, it becomes heavily about custody and about keeping people in prison as a way of simply preventing them from committing crimes by kind of holding them, locking them up, incapacitating them. It can be exaggerated, the degree to which incapacitation has a monopoly on penal justifications or rationales. Actually, if you go around the states, you'll find that there's some variation there, and a lot of states actually claim to be doing a lot of different things. California is a bit unique in making incapacitation and deterrence so explicitly the main event, and incapacitation above all the main event. I think that actually is revealing about the larger trend, but it can be somewhat of an overstatement. But that's certainly an important part of mass incarceration, this objective of custody. What else? How else would we define it? Because clearly prisons throughout history have had at least some incapacitative role. What else is distinctive about our contemporary practices of mass incarceration? Please.
You mentioned that there are warehouses and that programming is happening for less prisoners.
So that kind of goes along with the incapacitation point. The prison becomes kind of a warehouse. We used to say, well, it would be nice if there was some rehabilitation going on, but we don't really care. And the reality is that very little of it is going on. As I believe Professor Kirchnet in her article that I actually read for today points out actually by California, as of 2006, less than half of prisoners being released from California prisons had done even 1 day of programming. So we hear a lot of talk about rehabilitation, and for the last 5 years at least, it's been in the name of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, but not a whole lot of it. What else do you think of when you think about mass incarceration? Please.
Mass incarceration is conducive to overcrowding.
So California, again, is kind of an outlier here in the sense that we have had an extraordinarily high rate of overcrowding, say 200 to 300% overcrowding in a lot of prisons, and the duration of it, not for months or years, but for decades. But some level of chronic overcrowding is certainly a feature of mass incarceration. And again, if you think about it in terms of probably the single most important definition of it, which is simply the shift in scale from a historic pattern of around 100 people per 100,000, free people, 100 prisoners per 100,000. Let me show you another slide that makes it a little bit, try that one. So here's the red line is males and females, so that gives you the standard line. You can see this is just people in prison, not jail, but very steady. A little tick up during the Great Depression, substantial decline in World War II, very steady in here in the 50s, goes down a little bit in the 60s, begins to go up a tiny bit in the 70s, and then you get this rather dramatic, really quite dramatic increase. I'll show you some figures in a moment about how different regions in the country increased. But this is probably, if I was going to name the top 3 elements of mass incarceration, number 1 would be the shift in scale. Historically, going back to talking about the prison in the 19th century, the penitentiary, the big house prison at the end of the 19th century, the correctional institution in the 1970s. Despite the fact you have all these shifts in the kind of ambitions of prisons, there's a remarkable amount of continuity in how roughly the scale of imprisonment. And that really changes. Sometime in the 70s, we commit ourselves in various ways to a self-conscious policy of using prison more for more people, more of the time. And that results in a qualitative shift in the kind of a quantum leap, if you will, in the scale of imprisonment. Now, the reason I belabor that in terms of overcrowding is that overcrowding is not inevitable, but a very likely companion to this kind of dramatic surge, because the policies that you put in place to drive that many new people into prison that weren't there to begin with, or weren't there for the decades previous, and those are policies at various levels. Sometimes they're sentencing policies, sometimes they're policies set by prosecutors at a county level who are just acting on a kind of common political impulse but not being required to do so by the legislature. Sometimes it includes the governors and the people they're appointing to parole boards. So it can be a very complex policy change. But the whole set of changes that produces mass incarceration tends to create a kind of steady stream of prisoners, because you're moving away from focusing on individual offenses and whether they're particularly severe, or individual offenders and whether they're particularly dangerous, and you're kind of saying if it meets the bar, if it gets up to this level, then you're going to prison on a kind of automatic basis. Those policies tend not inevitably, but very likely to produce more potential prisoners or more candidates for prison than there is prison space, even though they go along with efforts by states to build more prisons. So overcrowding isn't inevitable, but it's a very likely consequence of this shift in the scale of imprisonment. And we'll look more at that shift in a moment. What else would you associate with mass incarceration as sort of key element of mass incarceration? Please. That's a very apt way of putting it. And it's sort of consistent with what I was making a moment ago, that mass incarceration sort of turns on the spigot and says, more people in prison, don't bother me with the details. In that regard, you're not looking much at individuals and saying, does this person make sense? Instead, you're looking at whole categories. This is an example that comes from the sentencing guidelines. A number of states and the federal government use so-called sentencing guidelines to sentence people. These often they're usually a complex set of rules that associate certain amount of imprisonment with particular crime severity levels that kind of rank all the crimes in terms of how severe they are. And then they also usually include your criminal record. So the longer criminal record you have, that's also going to increase your prison sentence. So like the judge or the probation officer is going to come along and go, well, you've got an offense level of 19 and you've got a criminal history category of 2. So that puts you in the 33 to 41 months category, right? So that's a classic example of that kind of categorical analysis of punishment. A couple things to say about this. One, a lot of states did not adopt this precise kind of sentencing. California, for instance, doesn't actually use guidelines like this. Instead, we have determinate sentences that are essentially 3 sentences, a high, medium, and low for each offense, with some rules for taking criminal record into account. Some states never got rid of the indeterminate sentence, and they still give people indeterminate sentences and then parole them. So I don't want to say that determinate sentencing or guideline sentencing alone is responsible for the growth in incarceration. Rather, I would say this style of sentencing captured in a more visible way a sort of logic of mass incarceration that was equally implemented in other sentencing systems that didn't take this particular reform. So even if states stayed with the indeterminate sentence, they had largely abandoned the objective of rehabilitation, and therefore they were not very encouraged to try to make individualized diagnoses or judgments about early release, and you end up with much the same thing. Now, one of the consequences of this kind of sentencing is that you tend to focus on the facts of somebody's criminal record and their crime, both of which are highly dependent on lawyering skills, frankly. That is, the particular crime, the offense type, might range from an offense level of 1, say 6 for something like being drunk and disorderly, down to an offense level of 33 for attempted murder, and yet the same bar fight might result in both charges depending on how good a lawyer you had or how cooperative the prosecutors decided to be. So when we look at some of these crime type, we're looking at not necessarily a very accurate representation of the particular danger they pose to the community, the level of harm they pose. Likewise, their criminal history is a reflection of multiple grade points like that. So it also is, at best, an inaccurate measure. All of which means that a system that puts a lot of emphasis on putting people in prison kind of automatically ends up putting a lot of people in prison who don't pose very much risk to their community or haven't done much harm. That's one reason that women have gone to prison in such high rates. Historically, women tended to be steered away from prison for at least 2 reasons. Sort of one I suppose you could say bad and one good. The bad reason was a kind of chivalry, a notion that women essentially should be treated more genteelly by the system than men, a kind of something of a double standard in that regard. But also also the notion that they weren't very dangerous, that some of it was a stereotype about women, but some of it was sort of an accurate sense that often when women are involved in crime, even the same crimes that men are involved in, they're less culpable. You've heard of accomplice liability. That means that if you commit a crime with another person, even if you do a very minor part of that crime, you're equally guilty of that crime. Well, typically we find as criminologists that when women commit crimes like burglary or robbery, they're usually an accomplice to their boyfriend. And in that kind of situation, you may not be surprised to learn that they may be a very minority shareholder of the decision-making in that particular crime sequence and what happens. So that is one product of this kind of categorical sentencing, is you end up putting a lot more people in prison who don't pose a very significant risk, and women, older people are among them. So we've got the scale of imprisonment, we've got this kind of categoric quality to the way prison is dealt with, and then we've got this kind of warehousing point that has been made that goes to the qualitative features. If you will, the scale is about quantitative shifts. The focus on categoric is looking at the kind of organizational dynamics, more of an institutional perspective. This notion of warehousing is a kind of qualitative judgment, and it's one that I have to say, I have to admit, I recognize rather late in my own engagement with mass incarceration, and the book I'm trying to finish now on the Brown versus Plata case is really trying to come to terms with just how serious the kind of qualitative degradation of prison conditions, as we see here, right? Going back to Bentham's Panopticon and Howard's drawings of penitentiaries, you would not have imagined that the prison at the beginning of the 21st century would consist of these kinds of hyper-crowded, dangerous, sprawling, confusing kinds of jail-like settings. But that is, in fact, what we had here in California until just a few months ago. Now, I just want to show you, because Richard didn't have these slides. These are some slides I put together with Hannah's help that give you a sense of how California fit in this giant shift that American states generally did from this kind of consistent level of about 100 prisoners for every 100,000 citizens to this much higher level of incarceration. So these are incarceration rates, and you can see that in 1977, which happens to be the year I started college, but it also happens to be the year that I think the data that we were looking at begins, this particular data series, the nation as a whole had 117 prisoners for every 400 or so people. I'm sorry, 117 prisoners for every 100,000 people in the community. The South, which is the part of our country historically, and you can imagine both kind of Marxist Durkheimian and all Marxist Durkheimian and Foucauldian analyses of why the South has been a very heavy punisher historically, was considerably above the national average at 159. Look at California at 88 prisoners per 100,000 in 1977. California was, if we treated it as a region, of course it's a state within the West, but it's such a big state that we can treat it as a region. When we do, California, we see that California in 1977 was essentially the second most lenient region in the country. The most lenient was the Northeast, with 82 prisoners per 100,000 citizens. The Midwest, the West without California was 92. Well, California would be second, and then the West, and then Midwest, and then the South. So California goes from being in 1977 the second most lenient part of the country as a region. Now look at the red bar, which is 2009. Nationally, we've got 444 prisoners for every 100,000. So that's a 280% increase in incarceration overall. But look at the regions. California has gone from being the second most lenient to the second most severe, and is just below the South and well above the other regions of the country. Let me just show you this representation of it that shows you the growth in incarceration rate. So notice that everybody except the South, which is the blue diamonds, starts in 1977 at about 100 per 100,000. And most regions of the country end up in a range from about 225 all the way up to over 500 per 100,000. So a quadrupling or quintupling. Look at the rate of change. You can see it's mostly in the 80s and the 90s at its fastest. It really slows down in the 2000s, and crime is plummeting in those decades. It's kind of amazing it's going up at all. But in particular, look at California, which is the red squares, and you can see that beginning in about 1985, there's a real shift in the slope, to be technical here, of California's line of increase of incarceration, and essentially California grows faster than any other part of the country, essentially paralleling the South and essentially catching up with the South, which is a rather remarkable thing to do. So as I put it, we go from being Michigan, a kind of lenient Midwestern state, to Mississippi, a very severe southern state, and this represents a real change in our penal practices and our penal philosophy. I just want to go back to this, a couple slides to put this in comparative perspective. This is very much, I was just looking at California compared to other parts of the country. Here's the United States compared to other countries, particularly European ones, and you can see these all cover roughly 1980 through 2005. There's the United States going from already about 200 in 1980 to over 600. This includes jail inmates. But two things to notice about this. Most other countries see some kind of increase in this period. The Netherlands actually, relative to where it was, goes up quite a bit from 10 or 20 per 100,000 to over 100. But compared to the U.S., it is really on a different scale. And here you can see a breakdown. Maybe we can shut this. So looking at imprisonment rates in the 2008-2009 period, grouped around the world, mostly European countries, this is an attempt to suggest that there's kind of different governmental strategies or political economies that may explain this, neoliberal, conservative, corporatist, social democracies. But what's really just remarkable to see here is the fact that for much of the rest of the world, 100 or below, what the U.S. had for most of our history, is kind of the norm, with some countries still remarkably below that, Japan at 63. You get countries that are called here neoliberal countries that have, and it's part of the argument of this table that, and this is not inconsistent with both Louis Bacant and Nicola Lacey's articles you read for last time, that countries with a more deregulated economy and a more go-it-alone sort of approach to a political economy seem to have higher incarceration rates. The one, my main hesitance in that is to point out that the difference between the U.S. and the next most punitive neoliberal country, which I guess would be New Zealand at 196, is huge, and in fact bigger than all the rest of the differences in the table. And so that tells you that whatever neoliberalism is capturing, it's not capturing the whole thing by any means. There's a very American quality to this that has much more to do with our institutions, our racial history, our sense of high crime normality. Okay, I'm going to move on to talking about inequality here, but I want to stop for a moment and just ask if you have any questions about either the nature of mass incarceration or sort of the explanations of what caused it.